My boss fired me for being pregnant. I owned 49% of his company. He thought he was firing a pregnant employee. He had no idea he was firing his boss. My name is Mia Thorne, and I am 28 years old. For the past 4 years, my life has been a carefully constructed mosaic of ambition and quiet contentment, each piece a part of my plan. The central piece of that mosaic was my job as a senior project manager at Innovate Tech Solutions, a cutting-edge tech firm that felt less like a corporation and more like a second home. I poured my heart and soul into that company, working late, mentoring new hires, and consistently delivering projects that not only met but exceeded expectations. My performance reviews were always stellar, my bonuses generous. I was on the fast track, and I could taste the sweet promise of a promotion to director on the horizon. But the most beautiful, life-altering piece of my mosaic was a secret I had been nurturing for the past 12 weeks. A tiny, fluttering heartbeat that was mine and mine alone. A secret I was planning to share with my team and my boss, Victor Vance, at our weekly sync meeting. I had the sonogram picture tucked carefully into my planner, a little black and white key to my future. I imagined his reaction, a pat on the back, a perhaps slightly awkward but well-meaning congratulations, and an assurance that my career path would not be hindered. Innovate Tech, after all, prided itself on its progressive culture. Or so I thought. The air in Victor's office that Tuesday was different. It was always cold, a sterile, climate-controlled environment that matched his personality, but today it felt particularly Arctic. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a view that usually inspired me, but today it just felt like a reminder of how high I had climbed and how far I could fall. Victor sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a fortress of polished wood and steel. He didn't offer me a seat, which was the first red flag. His usual smug smile was replaced by a thin, bloodless line. His eyes, which usually held a dismissive glint, were cold and calculating. He began by skimming through my latest project report, a report I knew was flawless. He found imaginary faults, nitpicked at timelines I had meticulously managed, and questioned my commitment. His words were like tiny, sharp needles pricking at the balloon of my confidence. I stood there, confused, my hand subconsciously resting on the gentle curve of my stomach. I tried to defend my work, to provide the data he was conveniently overlooking, but he waved my explanations away with an impatient flick of his wrist. And then he delivered the blow. He said that the company was heading in a new, more demanding direction. He said he needed people who were 100% committed without distractions. He looked pointedly at my stomach, and in that moment, I knew. He knew. Someone had told him. The words that left his lips were simple, cruel, and final. My position was being eliminated, effective immediately. He used corporate jargon to cloak the ugly truth, but the message was unmistakable. I was being fired because I was pregnant. The injustice of it hit me like a physical blow, a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my condition. All my hard work, my dedication, my sacrifice, it had all been rendered meaningless by a single discriminatory decision. I was speechless, my carefully prepared speech about my pregnancy turning to ash in my mouth. He told me security would escort me out to collect my things. He didn't even look at me as he turned back to his computer screen, his attention already elsewhere, as if I were nothing more than a pesky email he had just deleted. Walking out of that office, the stares from my colleagues felt like 1,000 tiny judgments. I kept my head high, my vision blurred with unshed tears of rage and humiliation. As I packed the small cardboard box with my personal effects, a framed photo of my parents, a succulent I had nurtured from a seedling, a coffee mug with a motivational quote, I felt a strange shift inside me. The initial shock and despair began to crystallize into something else, something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. A memory, long dormant, began to stir in the back of my mind, a conversation with my late grandfather years ago, under the shade of an old oak tree. He had founded Innotech Solutions. He had built it from nothing. And he had told me something I had forgotten in the day-to-day grind of my career. A promise, a legacy. The drive home was a blur of gray city streets and red taillights. Each one felt like a tiny, mocking eye. The cardboard box sat on the passenger seat, a pathetic monument to my shattered career. I wasn't crying anymore. The tears had dried, replaced by a hollow, ringing silence in my ears. I replayed the scene in Victor's office over and over. His smug face, his cutting words, the casual cruelty with which he had destroyed my world. The injustice of it was a poison seeping into every part of me. This wasn't just about losing a job. This was about being stripped of my identity, my value, all because I was choosing to become a mother. When I got home to my small apartment, I didn't even bother to unpack. I just left the box by the door and sank onto my sofa, staring at the wall. For hours I sat there, a statue of grief and anger. The world outside my window went on, but my world had stopped. But as the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the room, that memory from the office returned, stronger this time. It was my grandfather, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners, his weathered hand holding mine. He was talking about his company, his life's work, Innotech. He was worried about its future after he was gone, worried that people like Victor Vance, who cared more about profits than people, might one day take over. I stood up, a sudden sense of purpose propelling me. I walked into my bedroom and pushed aside the heavy wardrobe, revealing the small, dusty safe embedded in the wall. It was an old thing, a relic from a previous owner, but my grandfather had always used it to store important documents. I spun the combination, my fingers trembling slightly, and the heavy door swung open with a satisfying click. Inside was a single, worn leather portfolio. I hadn't looked at it in years, not since he passed away and my father had given it to me, telling me it was important but that I was too young to understand its contents. I brought the portfolio to the living room and laid it on the coffee table. With a deep breath, I opened it. The first thing I saw was a photograph of my grandfather, young and vibrant, standing in front of the original Innotech office. Beneath it were a series of legal documents, their pages yellowed with age. My eyes scanned the dense legal text, searching for meaning. And then I found it, a shareholder agreement, and next to it, a last will and testament. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet room. The documents were clear. My grandfather, in his wisdom, had not wanted the company to go public or to be sold to a competitor. He had structured the ownership in a very specific way. Upon his death, 51% of the company's shares were to be held in a trust, with the CEO acting as managing trustee to ensure operational stability. The remaining 49% had been left to me, his only grandchild. I was a silent partner. The documents showed that my father had been the trustee of my shares until I turned 25, 3 years ago. I owned 49% of Innotech Solutions. Victor Vance, with his 51%, thought he was king. He had no idea that the queen was sitting right under his nose, working as a project manager, and he had just fired her. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. The despair, the humiliation, the helplessness, it all evaporated, replaced by a surge of power so intense it was almost dizzying. I wasn't a victim. I was his boss, or at least his co-boss. He hadn't just fired an employee, he had committed an act of war against a majority shareholder. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. A lawsuit for wrongful termination was too small, too personal. This wasn't just about my job anymore. This was about my grandfather's legacy. This was about justice. I wouldn't just beat him in court. I would take him down in the boardroom. I picked up my phone, my hand steady for the first time all day, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Mr. Abernathy, the oldest member of the Innovatech board, and a man who had been my grandfather's most trusted friend. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff, familiar voice answered. Mr. Abernathy. He was old school, a man who valued loyalty and integrity above all else, a living relic of my grandfather's era at the company. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid out the situation, my voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the turmoil I had felt just hours before. I told him about the illegal firing, about Victor's blatant discrimination. Then I told him about the portfolio, about the shares. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, a silence so deep I could hear the faint hum of his old-fashioned rotary phone. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with a mixture of shock and a slow-burning anger. He remembered the agreement, of course. He had been there when my grandfather drew it up. He had always wondered what had become of the 49% stake. He confessed that Victor, when he took over as CEO, had been dismissive and vague about the other shareholder, leading the board to believe it was held by an inactive overseas investment fund. That was Victor's first mistake. His arrogance had made him believe he was untouchable, that the board was merely a formality. He never counted on them having any real power or any loyalty to anyone but him. Mr. Abernathy and I spoke for nearly an hour, strategizing. He confirmed that what Victor had done was not only morally reprehensible, but also a gross breach of his fiduciary duty as CEO. It was grounds for immediate dismissal. We agreed that a direct public confrontation was risky. Victor was a snake. He would try to spin the narrative to discredit me. We needed to control the boardroom first. Over the next 2 days, a clandestine operation unfolded. Mr. Abernathy became my proxy, my general on the inside. He called the other board members one by one. There were 5 of them in total. He didn't reveal my identity at first, simply stating that a significant shareholder was calling an emergency meeting to address a matter of urgent and severe misconduct by the CEO. The curiosity was piqued. Then he began to quietly share the details. He told them about the illegal firing. He reminded them of the company's stated values, the ones Victor so flagrantly ignored. He spoke of my grandfather's vision, of a company that was more than just a balance sheet. The response was better than we could have hoped for. 2 of the board members were newer appointments, Victor's yes men, but the other 3, like Abernathy, were old guard. They had served with my grandfather. They were disgusted by Victor's behavior and thrilled at the prospect of ousting him. They had long felt his autocratic leadership was poisoning the company culture, but they had lacked the power to challenge him. My 49% stake was the weapon they had been waiting for. With their support, we had a majority on the board. The trap was set. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Petrova, whom Mr. Abernathy had recommended, drafted the official letter. It was a masterpiece of corporate legalese. It formally requested an emergency meeting of the board of directors to be held in 3 days' time. It cited the shareholder agreement, my right as a 49% owner to call such a meeting, and the reason for the meeting: a vote of no confidence in Victor Vance and a motion for his immediate removal as CEO on grounds of gross misconduct, including financial mismanagement and creating a hostile, discriminatory work environment. The letter was sent via certified courier, a physical, undeniable document that would land on Victor's desk with the weight of a guillotine blade. I imagined the scene in his office. The courier arriving, the official-looking envelope being placed on his pristine desk. He would open it, expecting some routine corporate matter. He would scan the letter, his eyes widening as he read the words emergency meeting, gross misconduct, and removal. And then he would see the signature at the bottom, the name of the shareholder calling the meeting, Mia Thorne. The name of the pregnant project manager he had so carelessly fired 2 days ago. I pictured his face, the smug confidence draining away, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror, and finally, pure, unadulterated panic. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and he didn't even know the game had begun. He slammed the letter down and immediately called his head of legal, his mind racing. Who, he would demand, is Mia Thorne? The next 72 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. While Victor was scrambling to understand the seismic shift in his world, I was methodically building my case. My apartment, once a quiet sanctuary, had transformed into a war room. Legal documents were spread across my dining table. My laptop was a hub of encrypted communications, and my phone buzzed constantly with updates from Mr. Abernathy and Miss Petrova. I felt a sense of clarity I had never experienced before. The pregnancy, which Victor had seen as a weakness, now felt like a source of immense strength. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for my child, for the future I wanted to build for them. Victor's first move was predictable. He tried to dig up dirt on me. He had his IT department pull my entire employment file, my emails, my project history. He was looking for anything he could use to paint me as incompetent, unstable, or vengeful. But he found nothing. My record was spotless. My work was exemplary. His frustration must have been immense. He then tried to find a loophole, a way to invalidate my shares. His legal team, a pack of high-priced sharks he kept on retainer, would have been burning the midnight oil, searching for a forgotten clause, a technicality in the shareholder agreement. But my grandfather had been a brilliant man, and his lawyer had been even better. The documents were ironclad. His next tactic was intimidation. He began calling my personal phone. I let the calls go to voicemail. His messages started as veiled threats, then morphed into cajoling, almost desperate offers. He proposed a settlement. He would pay me a generous sum, far exceeding any severance, in exchange for my shares. It was a pathetic attempt, a clear sign of his panic. He was trying to buy his way out of the mess he had created. I instructed Miss Petrova to respond with a single cold sentence. All communication must be conducted through legal counsel. My silence was more powerful than any argument I could make. It showed him I was not to be bargained with. Meanwhile, my allies were hard at work. Mr. Abernathy, using his authority as a board member, was quietly gathering testimonies. He spoke to my former colleagues, the ones who had witnessed my dedication and Victor's tyranny. At first, they were scared, worried about retaliation. But when they learned that I was the mysterious 49% shareholder, their fear turned to courage. One by one, they came forward. They wrote sworn statements detailing Victor's abusive management style, his habit of taking credit for others' work, and his discriminatory comments about women in the workplace. My firing was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a years-long pattern of toxic behavior. A young woman in the marketing department even came forward with a recording she had made on her phone after a particularly brutal meeting. In it, Victor's voice could be heard, clear as day, complaining about how female employees get distracted by family and kill productivity. It was the smoking gun. The day of the meeting arrived. The morning air felt crisp, charged with anticipation. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple, elegant black dress and a tailored blazer. It was professional, powerful, and a stark contrast to the distracted, pregnant woman Victor had tried to paint me as. As I drove to the Innovatech Solutions building, I felt no fear, only a sense of calm resolve. I was no longer Mia Thorne, the fired project manager. I was Mia Thorne, the heir to the Innovatech legacy. I walked through the glass doors of the lobby, my heels clicking sharply on the polished marble floor. The receptionist, a young woman who had always been friendly to me, stared with her mouth agape. I gave her a small, reassuring nod and walked towards the elevator bank, not as a disgraced employee being escorted out, but as a woman who was about to clean house. I pressed the button for the top floor, where the boardroom awaited. The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped into the lion's den, ready for the fight of my life. The Innovatech boardroom was a space designed to intimidate. It was a vast, cavernous room with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a commanding view of the city below, a view that Victor clearly relished. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by a dozen high-backed leather chairs. It was a throne room, and Victor had always been the king. But today, the dynamic was different. As I entered, I saw that he was already there, sitting at the head of the table, flanked by his two high-priced lawyers. He wore the strange smile, a mask of bravado that did little to hide the panic in his eyes. He looked like a man trying to bluff his way through a hand with terrible cards. The other board members were already seated. Mr. Abernathy gave me a subtle, encouraging nod as I took the seat directly opposite Victor. The air was thick with tension, a silent battle being waged before a single word was spoken. The corporate secretary, a neutral party, sat at a small desk to the side, ready to take the minutes. She called the meeting to order, her voice formal and devoid of emotion. She read the agenda, a single devastating item: proposal for the removal of Victor Vance as Chief Executive Officer. Victor was granted the floor first. He stood up, adjusting his expensive suit, and began to speak. His voice was smooth, practiced, but it held a slight tremor. He tried to frame the meeting as a misunderstanding, a disagreement over corporate direction. He attempted to portray me as an emotionally unstable, disgruntled former employee who was overreacting to a standard corporate restructuring. He made a pointed, condescending reference to my condition, implying that my judgment was clouded by hormones. It was a pathetic, desperate tactic, and I could see it backfiring as the old guard board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When he finished, it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I stood up, placed a neatly organized stack of documents on the table, and began my dismantling of his empire, piece by piece. I started by having the corporate secretary confirm my identity and my legal status as a 49% shareholder in the company. The finality of that fact hung in the air, a palpable shift in power. Victor's face tightened. Next, I calmly presented the evidence of his financial mismanagement. I had spent 2 days poring over the company's public and internal financial records with the help of a forensic accountant Mr. Abernathy had recommended. I highlighted a series of disastrous investments he had made, vanity projects that had cost the company millions, all while he was slashing budgets in crucial departments like R&D. I showed how he had used company funds to finance his lavish lifestyle, charging exorbitant consulting fees to his own shell corporations. The numbers were undeniable, a clear pattern of self-dealing and gross incompetence. Then I moved on to the culture of fear he had created. I read aloud excerpts from the sworn statements of my former colleagues, their words painting a harrowing picture of his bullying, his intimidation, and his systematic disregard for the well-being of his employees. I detailed the high turnover rate in key departments, a direct result of his toxic leadership. And finally, I played the recording. The young woman from marketing's voice was shaky at first, but then Victor's boomed through the room's high-end speakers, his words echoing his own bigotry and misogyny. Female employees get distracted by family and kill productivity. The silence that followed was deafening. Victor's face had gone from pale to a sickly shade of gray. He looked like a man who had just been publicly executed. I looked directly at him, my gaze steady and unwavering, and then I turned to the board, awaiting their verdict. The king was dead. All that was left was to bury him. The vote was a formality, a necessary final step in a battle that had already been won. Mr. Abernathy, his face a mask of grim satisfaction, was the first to speak. He moved for the immediate removal of Victor Vance as CEO and his expulsion from the board of directors, citing the overwhelming evidence of gross misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and behavior detrimental to the company. One by one, the other board members seconded the motion. The two members who were Victor's appointees sat in stunned silence, their allegiance shattered by the mountain of evidence against him. They knew which way the wind was blowing. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. The corporate secretary recorded the outcome, her voice echoing in the silent room. It was done. Victor didn't say a word. He just sat there, his face a canvas of disbelief and utter defeat. The arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only a hollow shell of a man. The same security guards who had escorted me out of the building just a week ago now appeared at the boardroom door. At Mr. Abernathy's nod, they stepped forward. Victor was instructed to gather his personal belongings and vacate the premises immediately. He was fired in the same cold, impersonal manner he had fired so many others. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. As he stood up and walked out, his shoulders slumped, he didn't dare to meet my eyes. He was just another disgraced employee, his reign of terror over. With Victor gone, the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The tension dissipated, replaced by a sense of relief and renewal. The board members turned to me, their expressions a mixture of respect and curiosity. They asked me what my vision was for the company, what I wanted to do next. They were, in essence, offering me the throne. But that was never my goal. I had fought for justice, not for power. My focus was on my grandfather's legacy and, more importantly, on the new life growing inside me. I told them that I did not want to be CEO. My role was that of a guardian, a silent partner, ensuring the company stayed true to its founding principles. I recommended that Mr. Abernathy step in as interim CEO, a suggestion that was met with unanimous approval. I proposed a new task force, one that would be dedicated to overhauling company culture, implementing fair and transparent HR policies, and fostering an environment of collaboration and respect, rather than fear and competition. I would serve on that task force, but as an advisor, not a leader. My priority, I told them, was my child and building a world where they could grow up seeing their mother as a fighter, but also as someone who knew what truly mattered in life. A few months later, Innovate Tech Solutions was a transformed company. The toxic energy was gone, replaced by a vibrant, innovative spirit. Employee morale was soaring, and productivity, ironically, had skyrocketed under Mr. Abernathy's steady and compassionate leadership. I would visit the office occasionally, my belly now round and full. The smiles I received from my former colleagues were no longer ones of pity, but of genuine warmth and admiration. They were my allies, my friends. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was in the nursery I had so lovingly prepared for my baby. The walls were painted a soft, sunny yellow, and mobiles of little felt animals hung over the crib. I was putting the finishing touches on a bookshelf, arranging a collection of children's stories my grandfather used to read to me. As I stood back to admire my work, I felt a sharp, delightful kick from within. I placed my hand on my stomach, a profound sense of peace washing over me. I thought about the incredible journey I had been on, from the depths of despair in Victor's office to the triumphant showdown in the boardroom. It was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power, honoring my grandfather's memory, and fighting for what was right. I looked at the wall above the crib, where two framed pictures hung side by side. One was a faded photograph of my grandfather, a twinkle in his eye. The other was my original shareholder certificate, a symbol of the legacy I would one day pass on to my own child. The fight was over, and a new beginning was just around the corner.